joined by Baylor women's basketball coach Nicki Collen, again about to start the NCAA tournament, Hawaii on Friday afternoon. Is it kind of a reset mentally through the grind of the season, post the conference tournament? Is this kind of an emotional or physical reset in any way?
You know, I think it's just like a new start. So in some ways a reset, a reboot. I mean, I think everybody knows at this point you're 0-0, and, you know, your goal is to win 6 games and be the only team in the country that finishes their season with a win. So I think it's kind of rejuvenating just to be in that space, to not be fighting out of an 0-2 hole in a conference regular season or things like that. You know, we're all so it is a bit of a fresh start.
When you were 0-2 to compare to where you got to win it all, and then you got through the championship game on Sunday with Texas, did that climb out of 0-2 seem like it was months rather than maybe 6 or 8 weeks?
You know, I always say, like, in general, I always felt this way even when I was a stay-at-home parent, that, like, days were long and sometimes weeks were long, but then a month would go by and you'd just feel like you just blinked and a month had come by. And so in some ways it was a little of both. I think the grind, the daily grind, made it feel long, but all of a sudden you look back and you go, wow, I remember sitting in COVID isolation in my house, realizing that I'd been in that rental property since August and probably spent more time in those 5 days in my house than I had, you know, in the previous 6 months. So, you know, I do think it went more quickly than you realize because, you know, you're fighting so hard to be the best version of yourself, and you know, but all of a sudden you're 1 game away, and then you're in the conference tournament, and now we're in the NCAA tournament, and now you look back and it's like, wow, I got hired on May 3rd, and here we are in March. So, you know, it's kind of crazy.
I want to go back to last weekend for just one more time, and then I want to focus, of course, on the future, which is what you guys are doing. You and I traded a couple of text messages about your post-game, the emotions, and it seemed like you had been, at times, you were transparent throughout the entire season, but you really unleashed a little bit. Was that just all of it coming together at once and losing? And then you said you felt a little vulnerable. There's nothing wrong with that, is there?
There isn't, and you know, like, you obviously sent me a quote that's Brene Brown, who is someone that I've read so many of her books and listened to her podcasts. And gosh, I think about the pandemic and being stuck at home during the pandemic, those early few weeks, and walking just to get out of the house and do something. And I'd put her podcast on. So I know that vulnerability is strength. I just think that, you know, while I certainly came into this job needing to be my authentic self, like, you know, the comparison game was going to get me nowhere fast from the beginning. But I think, you know, it was the emotional buildup in that moment of months of, hey, when we win, that's the standard and the expectation. And it's almost like it takes the joy away from it because it's what you're supposed to do. You know, it's what people expect. And if you lose, then you're not good enough, or it would have been different if, or, you know, I mean, everybody has something to say. And so it just, that is mentally draining, you know, and it doesn't mean I didn't know it was going to be tough, but I think when you're going through it, you realize that it's just really hard to please people. And I've learned a valuable lesson at 46 years old this year that, quite frankly, no matter what I do, no matter how good or not good we are, some people just aren't going to like me, you know? And that is not, I mean, honestly, David, that is not an easy thing for me. Like, it's not how I'm wired. I'm like so people-centric and people-driven, and, you know, I've said from the beginning, like, hey, you may not like how we play, you may not like my style, but I think I'm really hard to dislike. Well, the reality is people just chose to dislike me. And so I know who matters, you know, and in that moment it was like making sure people understood that, like, I know who matters. And it's the locker room, you know, it's my team, it's my staff. Mac and Javon, obviously, were in the locker room. Like those, that's family, and that's what's important. And and so you're always growing as a human. Like if you don't, like why are you around? But I think we're always learning different lessons, and that's really my lesson that I learned this year.
You sit there and you sometimes may say, and in the media, my job, what I do, our profession, is you sit there and go, don't listen to the outside noise, don't criticism. It's hard. It's almost, some people really can just deflect it and not care, but there are different people, you and I, whoever, are wired differently, and you do hear it, and it does hurt. Now, you're playing really well. I know Sunday didn't go well. In your opinion, regardless of Sunday, are you playing at a level where you can get to the Final Four?
Yes, and you can't discount what happened Sunday, but for us, I think we have to throw it away. I think we have to understand that we're going to potentially face teams that are going to put that kind of physical pressure, and that we have to be more mentally poised. It's not the physical pressure that ultimately gets to you against Texas. It's the mental fatigue from handling the pressure, and we were poised enough the first 2 times we played them. And, whether it was losing Nalissa, whether it was third game in 3 days, I hate using that as an excuse because Texas played 3 games in 3 days as well, and they played overtime, and Rory and Joanne went all 40 in the 45 in the Iowa State game and 40 in our game. And so, you saw moments where you thought, okay, here's our run, and then we would just throw the ball out of bounds, like, totally forced turnover type of thing. And you just knew it wasn't our day. And that happens in sports. And so you just have to turn around and say, okay, we've got to be the confident team that played against Oklahoma. And, we just have to understand with each opponent where our strengths. And certainly part of our strength is our balance and our ability to play inside out. But when you start to play teams that now you haven't played twice in 3 times, or if it's Caitlin and Liz and Queen that you've played against those teams 3 times a season for 4 years, like you can't take for granted now that you have to do your prep, that you've got to understand your scout because, these aren't players that you've played against before, or you've played against them once, or, and so I think that's the challenge. The challenge for us is like just the refocus, the attention to detail, not taking any opponent we play for granted regardless of seed. And so I think that's where we're at.
Obviously, Nalissa has the ability to carry a team on her back, but it takes everybody. Jordan, Sarah, whoever else, Queen, I know Caitlin, and I'm not trying to forget Jamie, there's other names, but who has to play better? Who has to be like the difference maker other than the ones that people know you have to rely on? And you don't have many because of your depth and attrition, but is there someone that must step up this week into the next 3 weekends if you're going to last that long?
Well, I think every team, when we certainly scout, we look at wins versus losses. And like what are the analytics of that? Are they team driven? Is it rebounding? Is it turnover margin? Is it points in the paint? What is that number? And then, or is it player driven? And sometimes it's both, or you can find 2 things. I'll give you an example. In Iowa State's win, Donarski is a big factor. In their losses, she's not. We beat them by 25 points twice. Donarski never hit double figures. So that lines up. Now, small sample size with teams that haven't lost a lot of games, obviously. Mm-hmm. But ours is Queen. Ours is, in our wins, Queen averages 13 points and 9 rebounds, and in our losses, she's around like 6 and 5. And it's not dictated by number of shots because her shot volume is very similar. But I think, we started out that game, and I think that Texas game goes differently if we just step up and make foul shots, So I think Queen is important for us. She's important at the defensive end, that she stays out of foul trouble, that she rim protects without fouling, that we can play through the paint, with both Liz and her. And then for us, a big part is Jordan. I think that Jordan kept us in that game early against Texas, but struggled in the second half. But we've been at our best when she's been aggressive and search shots early. When you think about the Iowa State games, and she was such a huge factor for us. And so, Sarah's been dealing with injuries for the last 3 weeks, and I think, it's probably made her production go down, and we feel like, we would rather have, Sarah at 70% than no Sarah. But I think, those two really, because they both handle so much pressure for us, are key players for us. Like, if you look at our wins and losses, Melissa's numbers don't matter. And I don't mean they don't matter.
Sure.
But they matter.
Right.
But I mean, they're consistent. Wins and losses, she puts points on the board for us, and we're going to play to her and through her. But I think it's sometimes those other pieces that, are just as valuable to us in terms of protecting her, quite frankly, and not putting it all on her shoulders.
She came back and played a lot in that game with Texas. Is everything, there's no repercussions or consequences? She's fine, right? She's okay to go, everything good?
She is fine. Now, we did all the diagnostic tests when we got back just to make sure. I will never, ever, prioritize, the team and winning a game over player safety. And Liz has a huge, huge future in front of her. And so, they told me she was going to try in the second half. And, we actually even questioned whether we should start her because she had 3 fouls. She not only had gotten hurt, but she had 3 fouls. And, I'm like, well, if she's going to play, she needs to play now when she's warm, or we can get her warmed up out there. And then, if she can't go, like, I gotta know, and we'll pull her right away. And so, she went the entire second half. So, and, as much as we weren't great, our plus minus when Liz was on the court, even during that Texas game, we were only -2. So, had we had her the whole night, that game might have been a little different. But no, she's okay. We're certainly being careful in her return to play, but she's okay.
You mentioned in my last question, you mentioned about what matters is what's in that locker room. Earlier this year when you beat Iowa State at home, I remember when Queen Egbo, and I believe it might have been Jordan Lewis, it could have been somebody else, I don't remember, when they were very much, they had your back, and they talked about the grind and all of the chatter. And I remember that moment. I remember I told you that you had kind of a tear in your eye. But Sunday, when you were discussing the emotions and the grind of the season and how you wanted them to win for them, when that time became kind of that really emotional time, Melissa leaned over and kind of touched your shoulder. What did that mean to you?
Well, it's kind of out of character for Liz, so it actually meant a lot. Like, she's a fairly reserved kid, fun kid, great personality, but, not the loudest in the group, not the most, I think, willing to put her emotions on her sleeve, a little more private. So it meant a lot, like, I think, I certainly think she's felt some of the pressure too. Now, it's different when you're a player. You control, like, you're out there and she can control whether we get a rebound or not, and, she has more control than I do. And I've always said that's why, as much as I'm passionate about basketball, if I could still be playing, I'd rather play than coach, because when you're a point guard, you have the ultimate control as a basketball player. But Melissa Smith has grown her game, grown her leadership capacity this year, and I just think proven kind of that she's got such a bright future ahead of her. Like, people ask me, like, obviously unanimous first team AP All-American, announced today,
Yep.
But someone said, like, make your case, why is she player of the year, and it's always so hard because I don't coach Caitlin Clark, I don't coach Aaliyah Boston. Everybody's team's different. Liz can't pull up from 40 feet and make a three, she doesn't have the size that Boston has. Like, you're talking about positionally 3 different positions, and but I think what Liz took on with a limited roster, the consistency that she's had, whether it's double teams or no double teams, whether teams play man or zone, I just think she has grown so much in terms of being able to be moved around. Like, she's just the ultimate queen on a chessboard that I get to move around. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing, that over time she's learned what I'm doing, and maybe even why. Like, I think we're getting to the point where there's the why is beginning. She's beginning to understand the why, as opposed to, like, really just kind of, okay, here's the play. Here's why I'm running that play for you. I'm screening you to the perimeter. I'm screening you into the post. I'm playing. I said it was as simple as, in the Oklahoma game, we thought she's got the size to dominate in the paint, and we were getting her the ball on the block, and she was struggling. Like, they were, she was turned into the baseline side. And then, man, when we went to Horns and kept her in the tunnel, and now she can face up and she can play either direction, and she doesn't have the sideline or the baseline in her way, all of a sudden it was like the game was a wrap. I mean, it was a wrap. And so, sometimes even for me, it takes me a minute to say, okay, this is where Liz needs to be right now. Mm-hmm. And against Texas, it was screening her, not in this game, but in the last time we played Texas, I screened her to the perimeter and isolated her. I needed to sooner against Texas this time, get her in the post-to-post ball screen, because she was 2 for 2 in it, and get her to where Ebo's got to switch and guard her, and so there's just, but I think she gets it. Like, I think she gets why I'm putting her in the different positions that I put her in. And so I think that's what's been really fun, to see her growth on the court, because it's not like I can pretend that I created her, because I didn't. Mm-hmm. She's a product of her family and her upbringing. She's a product of Ray Caldwell with San Antonio's Finest. She's a product of Kim Mulkey, and I inherited a really good player that I just kind of opened up the playbook to.
You do understand that for every one person that might say something negative, Baylor fans really, really love your style. And they really appreciate your transparency and what you've done under the circumstances. You understand that, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I am incredibly grateful. That's why, it's almost like part of when I said I felt vulnerable was because it wasn't so much in that moment, because it was an emotional reaction. And, like, I'm okay with wearing my emotions on my sleeve. I think it was, I'm so uncomfortable, even though I'm not afraid to have the spotlight. I'm not afraid to be in the public eye, to do my job, to meet people, to be the face of Baylor, women's basketball. But I always wanted to be about the players, and I felt like there was such an outpouring of support when, that emotional media clip, hit.
Sure.
That, like, then all of a sudden I felt vulnerable, because it turned back in, and everyone was, like, saying all these kind things, and which I'm grateful for, but it was like, okay, like, this is not me. I want this to be about the players. Yeah. This isn't about what I've done or not done. And so in some ways I think that was what made me more uncomfortable than just the actual emotional reaction to that moment of the press conference, or how I reacted. Like, mm-hmm. I've told the players, like, hey, this is just like who I am. Like, there's times I'm going to laugh. There's times I'm going to cry. Like, I don't see it as a sign of weakness. But, like, you're going to know. Like, you're going to know. I'm not going to hold back. I'm going to tell you when I'm disappointed. I'm going to tell you when I screw up. I'm going to tell you that I could have been better, that I will be better, that we can be better. But I'm also going to be joyful in my approach to my job. And so that was kind of it as much as anything. So I am incredibly grateful to be at Baylor. I would never take the decision back or anything like that. I just think sometimes people think this was an easy job because I inherited Melissa Smith.
Yeah.
And that is an amazing thing to start with. You know what I mean? Like, I am grateful for that, but I also think there were so many things in play here, back to, like, this expectation that winning is the only thing. Like, winning is the only thing. And, wanting my team to truly understand and be joyful in winning, and being joyful in getting to spend every moment that we can together and know that you may not be on a better team. Like, I hope you are. But if this is the best team you're ever on, what are you giving? How much of yourself are you investing? Because young players are always like, well, there's next year. And then you get to be a senior and you're like, wow, this is it, And so I think it's very easy to take for granted, like, the grind, which is where you create the memories that you take with you for a lifetime.
I know you got a game to get ready for in a tournament. Nicki, appreciate everything, the access, the emotions, and again, the transparency. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, David.
Nicki Collen, Baylor women's basketball coach on Sic'Em 365 Radio.
Coming up next, Kendall